Hello, everybody. It's Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. This is our office hours. I'm trying to find the date, Friday, January 9th, 2026. During these sessions, Francis reads the question that you've submitted. Martin, of course, is always right, pretty much. I try to pretend he isn't, but it's this is just ego defense. Um, and then I add depth and color if I can. If you want to submit your questions, you can. The link is included in the description of the video below. We tend to have quite a bit of a backlog, which I think we're working through,
We've
right?
we've gone through quite a bit of them in the encore sessions during December.
Okay,
I dare say. Well,
pretty
okay.
catchy.
This isn't all of them in the doc.
Oh, it is.
It is not
All right.
because we have more in
But there,
December. What you see in the doc gets us to about the start of December, but since then we got another 20 or so that came in.
Oh wow.
yes.
All right. So we got a little. It takes a bit for us to get to them. Just for your note, we can't. We lost our volunteer who turns these into shorts. Have we lost that guy, or is he still around?
We lost that guy. I never got any response back from him.
All right. So if anybody wants to convert these into shorts, that's our goal, is to convert them into shorts. It is way more work than you think. We're hoping that the AIs get in a position, or one of the services get in a position where they can split them up for us. But until then, it's quite a manual process. Anyway. So anyway, please submit your questions and we'll go. Francis, you want to kick us off, or do you have any other updates that you want to say?
Nope. Let's get started.
All right.
Question 1 from Suki. What is the cause and the remedies to bureaucratic institutional bloat, stagnation and inadaptability?
Okay, so this is a great question. Um, it's in and it's the core argument. It's part of the core argument in our volume, the Crisis of the Age, which really takes it takes the historic. There's a lot of analysis of rise and fall in the historical record. Not a lot, but there's a number of authors who've done quite a bit of work on it, and even in the 21st century, there's been some progress on it. Our job is first causes, so we reduce this to first causes. Um, and in the simple terms, um, as complexity increases, opportunity increases. So there's opportunity for good things, and there's opportunity for, of course, bad things. Now, in the case of bureaucracies, a couple of things happen with increases in numbers and with complexity, numbers, and scope. So the cause is natural human incentives to serve their own interest. And so all bureaucracies, essentially, or human organizations, eventually do experience what's called privatization. Just like we have a commons, right? The commons in our societies, there are things that can be privatized, right? I mean, the real problem for developing commons in human societies is the policement of them sufficient so that people are willing to invest in them. And so the same thing is true in private sector corporations and in public bureaucracies. It's a normal human behavior to try to privatize a commons. Well, that's usually expressed as organizations become self-serving to the interests of the people who live in them, right? So uh, uh, the the way you solve policing of bureaucracies is the same way you solve policing of internal organizations, and the way you solve policing of commons, excuse me, of commercial organizations, and the way you police commons. And that is that you have to maintain both transparency, measurement, a system of measurement, transparency, and accountability. So ABC, measurement, transparency, and accountability. Now, what we work in at NLI is we work in a system of measurement, right? Right. That's what we do. We reduce to first principles. We develop systems of develop systems of measurement for them, and in doing so, we recommend laws or at least behaviors that provide the transparency and the accountability, the measurement, transparency, accountability. The problem is that incentives are very natural. So when we say measurement, what we are really doing is measuring both the incentives to do what we want the bureaucracy to do and incentives within the bureaucracy to do what they want to do. So essentially, we're creating a judicial market, right? I mean, equivalent of a judicial market. The problem becomes transparency, as in who are the police, who are the reporters, and who are the people within that keep these things aligned. Normally, middle management is effectively this fulfills this role of positiva and negativa. However, middle management eventually becomes captured by the same process. Waiting for Francis to nod his head here with from experience. But what happens is it gets captured. The second thing is what becomes the real problem becomes that organizations that eventually not only have individuals pursuing their the consumption of or privatization of whatever of the whatever assets they're managing, and they develop a narrative justification for doing so, i.e., the public is stupid, or the big one in current bureaucracy is that it's better to do nothing than to point out a problem because I will be prosecuted by the organization for having pointed out this problem, or I will impose a cost or a resistance on the public we are supposed to serve. They will complain and they will get me in trouble. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, where doing as little as possible is actually in your best interest as a member.
I don't get that last part.
Which part?
The part where it's better to do nothing because if I point it out, then like what does the public do?
The public will go to the press or whatever, or complain or call your bosses or whatever, and it becomes don't be disruptive because don't complain, don't become disruptive, and so you develop what we at the Institute fight is called proceduralism, which is all bureaucracies tend to produce processes that minimize the risk of them actually having to do anything.
It's just cover your assetism, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm formalizing the colloquial here, but I mean that's actually what it is. And so bureaucracy, if you police these bureaucracies, they actually try to try to do as little as possible. I saw this when I worked in the Justice Department, and I couldn't stand it. It's one of the reasons why I don't want to work in the academy. I didn't want to work in the academy when I was first getting started, and I chose the private sector. It's one of the reasons that I built entrepreneurial companies instead of working for big companies, because I just can't fucking stand it. I might be autistically my moral, like most members of NFI, I might be autistically obsessive about my moral intuition, because most of us are at NLI. But that's why I built companies instead. So I don't want to go into. I don't feel like I think if I got my point across here, I don't need to go in much more detail. Well, Francis.
I think more or less, right? The way I kind of see it is one. My experience has mostly been in big companies, big tech companies specifically, that are wildly successful, created by entrepreneurs like you, Curt, who created something out of nothing. What I've noticed is over time, when that older generation either retire or whatnot, the organizations gets taken over by the next level of not necessarily stupid people, but smart and yet not smart enough to create the 0 to 1, i.e., like cunning politicians, in my words.
Yeah.
And it is in their interest to maneuver themselves into positions of power so that they can extract rent from the whole system.
That's right. And so what eventually happens is the civilizational cycle. The organization, whether it's a commercial one or commons, a commercial civilization, or a political organization of bureaucracy, is that the membership of the organization extracts so many rents that two things happen. It's no longer able to adapt to shocks, right? Which is what's happening right now in the tech industry, why some people are being let go. And so there's no free capital to adapt. Elon Musk showed that, well, we can free up capital really easily by getting rid of these people who are essentially politicals, right? And we can maintain just the pure execution staff and actually adapt the company. So that's actually what you have to do. You have to rotate elites. The same thing happens in political systems. You have to rotate elites. This, unfortunately, you can fire them as a CEO of a corporation, but as a public, you generally have to kill them. And that's the unfortunate part. Democracy has done, and rule of law, at least in the Anglo world, have done a really good job of making possible the rotation of elites. What you're seeing, at least in the political sense, the problem is the bureaucratic sense, and that is what Trump is currently doing. He's trying to force a rotation of elites by terminating as many of them as possible so that the incentives are restored, right? And he's identified us on a scale that honestly I did not understand the scale of it, that the amount of what essentially constitutes corruption, especially via the Democratic Party, the amount which constitutes the vast majority of bureaucrats, because that's who serves their interest, is that the scale of corruption is equal to the national debt production. In other words, there is the scale of corruption is so high that it's actually the cause of our national debt or expansion, and which I'm kind of shocked by. I would have thought it would be in the 5%, not in the 30%. The 30%.
What is in the 5% versus 30%?
I assume that corruption,
Oh.
like stuff that were, like this Somali thing that's out now in the news, is serving as a canonical example of just how bad this stuff gets. But I mean, the same was true for the funding well-intentioned operations. What was that? What's the bureaucracy basically shut down? I forgot the name of it already.
Like USAID?
USAID, yeah. So I mean, it turns out that basically that is the vehicle by which the state members ally with their private sector and semi-public sector allies to engage in corruption, which only funds their expansion. And so the scale of this, I mean, Musk was right. I I have, as Martin will remind you on a regular basis, an all too optimistic view of mankind. Um, Martin, is that correct? Am I doing you justice by saying that?
No, I would use the word delusional, but yes.
You know, Curt, like the more you strike his ego, the more sloppy he becomes, right?
I have to tell him he's right some way rather than just argue with him. But anyway, where was I? So the problem is this accumulates in the government. It then is it then what do we say, rolls downhill. It ends up in the private sector, like we've seen in the financial sector especially, but it's also the media and academy sectors. And then it ends up disenfranchising the public, who eventually get to the point where they stop engaging in moral defense of the commons. And then essentially you have civilizational adversarial decay, right? You have decay until the civilization is no longer able, just like every organization, to adapt to shocks. And so what we see at the out of that is usually populations don't have too much choice. It's not like the Middle Ages or antiquity. And so because going back to the farm is not an option for most of us any longer, and it hasn't been for quite a while. So we can't go back to subsistence farming. So our choice is, well, we can either die or we can replace elites, and this is what causes insurrection, civil war, and or war by external conquest. And we're in that phase right now, of course. Just I've been predicting for a long time, but so have others. Um, and we're having the problem of we need to rotate elites. What happens when you rotate elites is you clean up this slop generally, not always, and matter of fact, possibly more often not than you do, right? Civil wars are not notorious for not known for producing superior consequences until after the chaos of them has reigned, right? So in the end, you're trying to rotate the elites, and you're trying to develop a new elite strategy. So, right, what we've been doing is that essentially in World War, this way, there's two factors, right? You have the Industrial Revolution, right, which empowers a lot of things in humanity, one of which is war. Um, this brought about the Marxist attempt to rotate elites. Then you had the World War One, which essentially invalidated in the minds, because of the murderous capacity of war. It invalidated the aristocratic and traditional uh, ethics of warfare as a community project, and turned it into a hostility to elites. And so we had a transition from what was more of an aristocratic government and its private property interests to what would call a managerial state and its bureaucratic incentives. What we will end up with next, I have no idea. I'd like to guide it back I'd like to have it reform in the traditional English tradition, and come out the other side as a rotation of elites and a new civilizational strategy. Frankly, that's what I see Trump doing. But we could just as likely end up with a fucking dark age.
Does Trump even have the presidential powers to do that? I thought he couldn't because he's not a judge of last. Our constitution does not for the president to become a judge of last resort. Therefore, he cannot, like a king does, dissolve a parliament, so to speak.
Correct. He can't rotate the parliament. But what he unfortunately,
Yeah,
because
our
I mean,
equivalents, i.e., the House and the Senate.
right.
Uh,
What you
as
go
the
ahead.
army keeps pointing out, Lincoln and FDR managed to become de facto dictators
Mhm.
by ignoring the limitations.
Right. And
You
so the
can just
limit.
do stuff.
I mean, the fundamental truth is if the if enough people will do what the president says, right, he's essentially a king. The thing is, it as you can see, his approval rating, it upsets a lot of people. But anyway, what's happening now is he's ignoring those limits. He's using the power of the pen, which he does have, and the court is not necessarily constraining him. We
Mm-hmm.
are seeing some efforts here by the court to at least question what those limits are. But so far, they're not. They're only limiting what is durable that has to be done by Congress, and they're allowing him to do policing of the administration because, frankly, he's head of administration. And so this appears to be working. I don't. I know that the court at least vaguely understands what's going on, and so the court is at least other than the three lunatic lefts on the court.
All
Uh,
Biden appointees.
what a bunch of morons. Um, I know that the rest of the court basically is, the court goes along with this because their view is if we don't restore legitimacy, right? Because the only thing that's legitimate in the country today is the military, and the court has a little bit, but Congress has no legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh,
What does that mean in practice, though? Because nobody's killing yet. Leftists are killing.
no, people don't start killing until they feel that there's no alternative, right? And that's usually economics. People start killing when two things are happening. You either have runaway economic stuff, which usually debt, which is the majority of ways that civilizations collapse, or you have taxes that are imposed on people that put them up against a wall, which is the historical way that people most commonly revolted.
Right.
The third way, go ahead.
Okay, finish it.
No, that's fine. I don't have to go. I would go through.
So my question is, how do you differentiate something that's illegitimate from something that's legitimate when nobody's getting killed?
Wait, what? Say
Wait,
again?
I think you're passing a real you're placing a uh really high bar for demonstrated interest. Legitimate
Okay, how do you demonstrate it?
legitimacy is an opinion, right? I mean, it's an opinion. That's what it is. If the people think you could be a fucking dictator, if you're a benevolent dictator and the people love you, right, you're legitimate. When you're not legitimate,
Okay, but if people just have opinions and don't do anything, then what's the difference?
the difference is you may be illegitimate, but the consequences of your illegitimacy are not bad enough for people to make the choice. I mean, that's all it is. I mean, humans are rational actors. Um, if they will act when they feel pushed up against a wall, where that wall would dramatically influence their capacity for survival. Humans generally will look at status deprivation, in other words, a decline in their material condition, as a threat to their existence. But until it becomes a material threat to their existence, they tend not to take actions that are an equally or greater threat to their material uh, condition. So uh, this is different from across the spectrum. Conservative males are essentially the white blood cells of any organization, right? The human organization. Yeah, but but they're not a majority of the population at all times. And so, and of them, it usually takes a solid 1 to 3% of them in
Mm-hmm.
order to actually act. And so, as you've seen, which we're talking about yesterday online, is that and it was an online or no, it was in our staff meeting, is that what you generally have with dissatisfied males, that percentage of people willing to act, is that they're broken into factions, and that's why they can't act, because they're policed by other factions. What happens is that if you start to see coalescence among those male factions, right, the libertarians to the fascists along that spectrum, right, when you start to see coalescence there, such that they are willing to act on reality, right, the actual take action in reality, instead of advocate for the ideology or philosophy of their faction, when that change occurs, you are seeing coalescence, and we are in fact seeing coalescence. And so, what do I want to say? It's that people have to be willing to cooperate at least 1 to 3% of a population to take risks to their life and property in order for that to happen. Once that 1 to 3% happens, then you have the cascade effect. So what we're seeing in Iran is a great example of an illegitimate government that's greatly harmful to the people who are extremely tired of it, be externally punished, Israel and the United States. Their government is externally punished to the point where the population sees an opportunity to do a rotation of the elites, which is what we're seeing by demand.
Speaking of what's happening in Iran, I saw a tweet stating that what is it, the Iranian government building has been lit ablaze, but I'm not sure if that's AI generated or is actually for real.
I don't know, but they are attacking and lighting those buildings on fire.
Okay.
As I'm not going to cross a promised bridge to the FBI here. Apologize for this, but I have tried to explain that fire is the weapon of mass destruction in rebellion. It is it is the best tool people use to undermine a government to warfare against a civil warfare against a government that is perceived as not only illegitimate, which I think is more accurate how Martin's thinking about it. It's not illegitimate, it's harmful, right? It's a danger to the people. Fire is your friend. I've said before that it was fascinating to be there in that mob in Kiev and watch the people voluntarily assemble a production line of Molotov cocktails right in front of me, with girls and guys, and
there are certain things that there are certain things that the cheap vodka is only good for. Like you can't really drink it. I'm familiar with cheap liquor because I used to be the kid that my uncles tell me, they're like, go to the store and go buy this $5 bottle of whatever, and it smells like it could burn you. And I don't know how to drink that stuff.
horrible.
There's no way that stuff is so cheap if it's drinkable.
But anyway, so we're seeing the natural expression of it, and what if the people are willing to use fire? They can essentially. I mean, I was happening in front of me. I mean, they're just it's a Molotov cocktail. It's just fucking dish soap or a laundry detergent and gasoline with a rag stuffed in it, and then you have those psychos that you went to high school with, and they're guys that'll just like they love the excitement of threatening risk or something like that, and they're usually guys that cause trouble, right? Get in trouble because they need the stimulation, and those guys were just coming back, loading up with one or two, running up to the front line and then throwing them. But they did a pretty good job. The minute they shoot, the thing is, the minute they fire on you, you win.
No.
No, I mean you win in a democratic society. Sorry,
There's no such thing.
Say that again.
There's no democratic society, or ever has been.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. Whatever we want to call the president, president electoral.
Well, let's put it this way: the moment the government fires on you, it gives a populace the legitimacy to reciprocate in kind. Whether they have the capability to reciprocate in kind, that's another question.
Yes.
I.e., like, what is it, by actual journalism research, some 2,500 civilians and students were killed in the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, and the citizens couldn't really do anything. They did burn some armored vehicles, but it was then used as the state then used it as what do you call it, justification to say, see, these guys are rioters, and therefore our crackdown was legitimized.
Yeah, that's the thing. Usually government is perfectly capable of suppressing the opposition.
That's why we need populists.
Yeah.
But it's not, something has already gone very wrong.
If they disarm you, it's just a matter of time. Anyway, all right. So have we adequately covered this?
I had some issues with causality. There are an example, because America imposes sanctions on regimes it doesn't like, not because it's internally illegitimate. And then when everyone goes poor because of those sanctions, that makes the regime more illegitimate. So America can make the regime selectively illegitimate.
I don't know where to go with that, Martin. You're not wrong. Your bar is a little higher than I think reflects behavior. I'm not positive. Yeah. But it's not that I don't necessarily disagree with you. Okay. Next.
Yep. Next question. Question 2 for Curt. Can you kindly make a standalone video discussing an Anglo revolution, parentheses Reformation, that occurred from a natural law perspective? Feel free to geek out. In this video, would you discuss the context leading up, the grievance, a brief overview of the factions, and then the conflicts and reform thereafter? I fully understand that you are a busy man and would have no heartburn if you felt that your time was better spent in other tasks. I thought you did that in the 2024 fall conference video.
I'm pretty sure. I will tell you that I did write a book for that video. I just haven't. I'm afraid to publish the really negative stuff because it feels like I'm inciting violence. But in order to give that talk, I did a research, and I basically wrote a book for it. It needs final editing, but
sorry, I mistaken this. He says discussing the Anglo revolution that occurred from a natural law perspective, i.e. in history. So then your volume 1 should actually cover that.
Volume 1, it's covered in volume 1. As a matter of fact, I cover pretty much every major rotation in every civilization from the very beginning, in some level of detail, and that's how I basically track the change over time. So I definitely have it there. I'm reluctant to promise this because if you saw my workload right now, you would be like, you can't possibly do that. But I have times where I need to break from the work or whatever I'm working on and do something else so that I can refresh my neurons, so to speak. So if I get the opportunity, I will do that. I would enjoy it. It's just a question if I can fit it in.
Okay. Next question. Question
Well,
3 for Martin. Seems like you and Curt have fundamental disagreements. Oh, this again. Can you articulate a few of them and discuss why he's wrong and you are right? Oh my god, you just... Okay. That's like kicking over the hornet's nest. And,
no, I love this. This is a great.
and Martin wrote a lot. Okay.
Right.
I rewrote that 3 times so as not to sound too insulting.
So I view this as an important part of what we do. I would like there was somebody in the middle, between my more libertarian and Martin's more ultimately pessimistic. And I would like that if there were somebody in the middle between us, so we could get the 3 points to make a line. But honestly,
I can be that person, and I think it's really bordered on. If you look at it, it's really based on ancestral geographical environment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Your Anglo naval enthusiasm. You're on a freaking island, got natural moats and everything. Where Martin come from, they got enemies surrounded that can surrounded by enemies just march over, and China is half and half. Half of it it's borders the ocean. The other half is like desert and natural barriers, but people can still march over it.
Yeah. So I actually think these points of view are really important. What it stops us from doing is being one-trick ponies and to be cast as an ideology. What we're trying to do is produce a science, and the science the way you apply the science is to circumstance. And so it's good to have these perspectives so that you can have it. I think in doing that, you get this we get out of the trap that most philosophical groups get into, which is that there's one thing for everybody. We don't do that. We're like, there's laws of nature, and they have to be right. And then there are what's possible within those laws, and then there are circumstances in which you need to apply them. Now, I think Martin, in my view, Martin is over the top sometimes, but it doesn't mean that he's wrong, right? Or right? It just means that. Well,
I'm over the target.
Yeah. Okay. It just all right. So, but I do hold an Anglo island optimistic view of what is possible for man, and that is partly due to the fact that the Anglos invented this modernity that we're living through, and the world is succeeding and to failing at different degrees of adapting to it. And so I think it's a great thing. Anyway, so let's go ahead.
So I see everyone failing. So, insofar it's Anglo versus Continental, I'd say it's because isolation on an island allows one to ignore certain laws of nature, where those who don't get to only interact with others when they feel like it don't get that luxury. In that sense, island peoples are least likely to produce accurate social science without having some false promises baked in. Hello, Moritz. Some of it seems to go back all the way down to evolutionary computation and what we think the implications are. Curt appears to be of the opinion that there's a measurable rate, and civilizations are supposed to be maximizing it. I don't see how such a rate makes sense unless you're very specific about what's being computed and define a unit. Otherwise, you're just asking for more change, and change for its own sake is entropy. I take the opposite conclusion. We are a stable relation, and if we don't take precautions, we will be computed away like everything else eventually is. It's not to maximize change, but to defend against it. Yes, there is adaptation, but adaptation is a minimum viable change when the alternative is death. Yes, we have the ability to make predictions, but this is to better predict opportunities and threats in service of survival. And yes, there's value in experimentation in service of making better prediction. But we must never forget the end goal is persistence, i.e. resistance to change. The second issue is whether everything revolves around reciprocity. And it absolutely doesn't for me. Reciprocity is a means to the same end. Maintaining reciprocity with anyone is only as valuable as it contributes to the persistence relative to alternative options. One of the big insights of Curt's work is the first question of ethics being, why shouldn't I kill you and take your stuff? It seems to me Curt has long since stopped asking it and treats cooperation as always preferable. I've never stopped asking the question. Furthermore, even when the answer is because you're more valuable to me alive, the next question is, why don't I coerce you to do what I want? If optimal conditions for reciprocity were as common as implies, we'd be seeing a lot more of it than we do. The only conditions I see is either an overarching authority that enforces it because of some benefits it reaps in return of reciprocity, or reciprocity of mutually assured destruction. Furthermore, cooperation in the liberal framework leads to generation of demand for wasteful consumption, production of dependency, and concentration of wealth within the minority that doesn't have the best interests of the group in mind. And so where Curt wants to remove frictions to cooperation, I want to add frictions and limits to address those issues to produce self-sufficiency, anti-fragility, and healthy social ecology. In general, I object to giving more freedom to people in need of restraint, more innovation to people in need of stability, more comfort to people in need of strength, more rights to people in need of sense of purpose only duty provides. Next, I think Curt is projecting Anglo biases on our ancestors. I do not believe that the step raiders were some primitive bourgeois, but rather that what made them unique was their tolerance for hierarchy, where it produced and still does resentment in everyone else in the world. This gave us superior capacity for organization. Our group strategy is manifested by the military, not by merchants. Our natural regime is monarchy. Curt only allows for monarchy within certain limits, but then it ceases to be monarchy. And oligarchy is empowered. Either the king rules or he does not. Every country where monarchy gave an inch is now ruled by oligarchs. It follows that America isn't more Western than the West, other than in strict geographic terms, that its stated foundations were anti-Western, and what remained of the Western values within was smashed in the Civil War. What remained of it in World Wars and Cold War with the help of Soviets. This brings us to how, when talking about Europe, Curt resorts to usual talking points by which America justified its rule over it and its protection racket that amounts to blaming Europeans for the state America brought it to. For not resisting American impositions under conditions that America allows, which means no real monarchy and no real nationalism, i.e. no real right wing, for adopting the American values without protections of American Constitution. See this tweet.
Wait. I didn't get that, and that sounded smart to me. Give me that again.
This brings us to how, when talking about Europe,
I got it. I'm caught up. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Francis will share the links. I recommend Angelo Bloom's essay on the topic, The American Question. Curt still maintains there's something moral about what America did to the West and the world at large, because the intentions were good. By what standard can Curt claim this was moral without saying the same about communists? Doesn't it violate testimony where all actions must be explained as acquisition? Peace for its own sake, universalist rule of law, forced free trade, participation of irresponsible, degenerate, criminal, and foreign in governance, human rights for protection of these at the cost of normal, responsible people. All of those are just leftism and empowerment of oligarchy justified by the same universalistic and materialistic premises, not fundamentally differing from communism. Blaming radical Islam, which was barely an issue before American meddling in the Middle East. Russia, which is ruled by the same people as America. France, which I can hardly imagine would have brought Europe to the worse state than America. China for actually being sensible and trying to improve their own position instead of sharing same universalistic delusions. Anything but either admit fault or ceasing to associate with the American government, which has hardly done better for the American people than for the rest of us. I don't want this to be insulting, but what gets frustrating is how we often seem to reach an understanding, but the next time the topic comes up, like in the tweets, it's like the conversations never took place.
This is fucking awesome. Really, it's brilliant. I don't disagree with most of it, except that I'm looking for a science that is evolution. In other words, evolutionary persistence that generates growth, which means the capacity of consumption or transformation of energy per capita. I'm basically looking at the physics of it. I don't disagree with much what you're saying here. I think that it's my job to promote what I see, and it's your job to produce the limit. And I think that you do that. I don't. In other words, full accounting is full accounting within stated limits. Now, my basic argument is evolutionary. It's that you're right to want to preserve. What you say is you want to preserve your identity and culture. I agree with that. Right? That's how I'm going to interpret it. But the problem is that you only get that choice if you can resist all comers. And so my decidability is determined by the fact that that you don't get that choice if you don't adapt by producing equal means of defense. And I don't just mean military, I mean economic and cultural, because it's the cultural you're mostly talking about here. I don't want to, you don't get the choice to have them unless you maintain the economic capacity to pay for the defense of those commons, which is what they are, that you prefer. And so we don't get the choice to not race the Red Queen. We have to race the Red Queen. And so how do we race the Red Queen? It's not just what you want, it's what the world wants. Right now, we're in a race with the Red Queen of the restoration of the demand for territory that was used under the era of agrarian empires, which only value was territorial increase. So the only way they could increase anything. We're in the industrial and now the technological age, where you don't have to increase your territory. You're in a position today where you don't even need to increase your population to increase your ability to have agency over your future, right? What you have to do is maintain your capacity to compete in this world for your self-preservation. So you don't get to you don't have, as much as you may want to have the stability and the protection and insulation of your people from change. You don't get it without working for it, and the way you work for it is innovation, adaptation, and create. I don't understand how cause and effect follow here. It's not that I disagree with you, it's that I don't think it's possible.
Well, the distinction is that I put that as ends and innovation only in service of it.
Well, I would say that's the right answer, but you can't say that you don't have to do it. But now if I'm in the Anglo sphere, right, which I am, which is why I encourage you to have the Continental perspective. I think it's important to have. If I'm in the sphere, how should I state this? It's that we have, as you say, we have territorial geographic advantages, right? We do. This essentially creates a wall around us. This is always to the benefit. It's the benefit of Japan, just like it was the benefit of England. You have a much more powerful continent in both cases against a minority that's on an island, but that island is an extremely valuable asset in the sense of resistance. It's a fortress wall. The problem becomes is the natural resources available to you. So the way you compensate is by trade, right? Whereas you have conquest if you're territorial, you have territorial flexibility. But if you're an island, the way you do that is by trade. This is the same thing that happened in the ancient world, right? You would have everybody's always conflicting because their resources, especially, are relatively scarce until you get up somewhere closer to the snow line. But to have the snow line, now you've got to have. If you're at the snow line, now you've got to have. It's harder to organize defense than you do with the river countries, the river civilizations. It's harder to police them. It's harder. Your distribution of wealth is not wealth, but production is more distributed. The friction of trade is higher. So this is two endpoints, and we are all prisoners of whatever our geography is. This is why I think geostrategy is why I follow the geostrategists, is because geostrategy is what imprisons all of us. We don't have a choice. We have our geography, we have the culture that's developed in order to take advantage of our geography, and we have external competitors who are in geographies which the steppe being the best example. Geography of the steppe is shit. Why do you think that the fucking barbarians have been a problem for South Eurasia, have been a problem for East Asia, and a problem for Europe? It's because the territory that we consider today mostly Russia and the Stans, it's shit territory. It doesn't have access to oceans, which is the thing, and it doesn't have access to rivers, which are the two things necessary for people to be able to discount the transportation costs necessary to produce the income and wealth that's able to pay for the defense of one being able to deal with to preserve one's way of life. So what do you get out of it? You get out of that what emerged in the Middle East and the Arab world as raiding culture. They live in a world of raiding and undermining, which is basically their way of being able to distribute the means of warfare into a process of eroding the very trade and that makes the other civilizations possible. And so this is just it's not like we get a choice in this matter. It's all geographic reality. My argument is, and the reason I push the argument, is that trade compensates for those issues. And if the post-war order's ideal was that we ended agrarian empires, focused on the Industrial Revolution, focused on our internal populations, the improvement of our internal populations, instead of the ego status and ambitions of the elites, we focused on our people. And in doing so, the way to achieve that is to create trade. So it's not like I'm making a moral judgment here. I'm simply saying that the way you keep people out of the ambition that was the American ambition, which was to not have another world war that destroyed all that, then that was the right thing to do at the time. You are correct, Martin. The externalities produced by that ambition have been fucking tragic. But every innovation, doesn't matter what it was, the agrarian revolution, the first agrarian revolution, the later agrarian revolution, the Iron Age revolution, the Bronze Age, Iron Age, and Steel Age revolutions, the Industrial Age revolutions, the Age of Sail, every one of those things produced conflict because it enabled agency. And so any innovation gets good as well as bad. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying this is called, and you understand this. I mean, Brandon is an advocate of limits-based reasoning. I'm just working from limits. I'm working backwards from limits. I'm not working upwards from desires. I assume that if by articulating limits, we can moderate our desires to work within them. And I think that's somehow lost, as if I'm making a virtue argument instead of what's simply scientifically possible.
That's not what was in the mentioned post. There was a lot of moralizing.
Say again?
It's not what
It's not
was
what?
in that post. I'll put it in your chat.
You're saying the post I made or somebody else made?
I think Martin, you're referring to that tweet in the doc, right?
Yes.
He just put it in the chat as well.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
it's in the chat. I also put it in the YouTube video.
I don't think all that needed to be destroyed in the World Wars. It's that America determined what regimes we're forced to have afterwards.
But
yeah, but I'm only talking about the time period, the time period and American position in relation to it. We're asking this conversation we're having, which I'm not disagreeing with your desires or your interpretation. I'm saying that the people are limited by what they can have, and they don't get the choice of not adapting. I mean, you only can have what do you call it, our homage, if you give them a container. You could, in other words, you can only have libertarians if you have an ungoverned space that you want occupied until you can afford to govern it. You can only have the freedoms that I think you're asking for if you keep pace with economic and technological demands necessary for you to preserve it. I mean, that's all I'm ever saying. I don't know.
I'm saying we could have industrialized without throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Okay, what's the baby in bathwater we throw out? Because I'm probably going to agree with you.
Well, baby is agrarian society, and bathwater is all the hierarchy within it.
No, so I agree with you. That's why I said the same thing. We threw out the aristocracy because because the rate of change in the post-industrial revolution was faster than the aristocratic traditions could adapt to, and they were trying to maintain the imperial system when technology had made it impossible to maintain the imperial system on one hand, and second, it turns out that they lost money in their empires. So it doesn't make it, in other words, those were not profitable investments.
Oh, you mean the colony was actually a net drain on the West?
I don't think you're accounting for all the gains, such as autarky.
No, I'm accounting for. I said the net consequence was that because the European empires expanded it in an adversarial competition, the net result was that it costs more to domesticate those areas than they were receiving in benefits. In other words, the correct way to do it would have been to, or the optimum way to do it is.
Why are we caring how they benefited? It's about us.
No, well, because at some point, us is just whoever you're talking. It doesn't matter which group you're talking about. You're all facing the same problem. Is the Red Queen of civilization development is moving along, and you can either fall behind and be exterminated by it, or you can keep pace into some relative position. What I hear you saying is that a continental place that needs to maintain its cultural assets, needs to adapt more slowly and deliberately than a naval expansion area group that can do so by trade, because it isn't subject to near neighbor pressures. I mean, that's true. I agree with you. The continent, and the continent still does this. We're seeing this today, where the continent, especially under the Euro system, is advancing much more carefully and cautiously. But as a consequence, there has been no economic or technological advancement in Europe for 25 years. So Europe has fallen behind. What's happened in America is we have been relying on the entrepreneurial system to guide us, because that is the tradition that made it possible to capture the entire continent. On the other hand, what is China doing? China's doing the opposite. They're using the state to direct innovation in order to create a material adversarial advantage necessary for their territorial and influence expansion, as well as the preservation of the power of the Communist Party elites. So we have right there a beautiful spectrum. I mean, I could add Islam is trying to resist it, and Africa as not really quite understanding what's going on, but doing the best they can. And you'd have a spectrum of civilizations all attempting to do what's possible within the limits that bind them. I would argue that this would be something that I think, if you were along your lines, if I could, if I was China and I could dominate the world's manufacturing by not having a redistributive European system, in other words, and not caring so much about who's left behind or by how much, and I would move people rapidly into the cities and use my population to be able to dominate high risk research and development. If I could do that, I mean, they got a population intellectually capable of it. It's not like they're India, which has a population half of which isn't capable of it, despite that it's larger than China's. So people do what they can, and I agree with you that I agree with you that the state, what I consider the aristocracy, did a better job of directing investment in parallel with the entrepreneurship, and so did the Germans, so did the Nazis, so did the Italians. They combined state concentration of efforts into strategic advantages, the way China is doing, or the way Japan has done, the way South Korea has done. They were better at that. America hasn't been doing that since the end of the Second World War, the end of the 1950s. So instead, the America has been trying to have the opposite. They've been trying to maximize redistribution over the long term. They have allowed the export of jobs in the lower half of the demographic distribution. They have left behind whole generations since the 1970s, which contributed to the conflict. And so America's not doing a good job of it. America is still riding on the fact that our court system and our rule of law are protective of private property, to the point where investment has no choice around the world but to flee to America, where we concentrate those world investments and make use of them for holding high margin, high advantage economic production at the expense of our common workers. So I'm not disagreeing with that strategy of it. I'm disagreeing with the way you're claiming, what I think you're claiming it as a moral issue, rather than looking at it as active.
I wouldn't respond it to that way if you didn't present what Anglos did to the world as moral.
It was moral. It was a moral ambition. It worked. It dragged humanity out of ignorance.
Well, moral in the neutral sense.
Huh?
Moral in the neutral sense. That it was justified by some moral ideology.
No, it's justified by not having another world war, not having communism expand, and instead dragging people into the prosperity that would not create demand for communism.
But we had liberalism expand, and that's worse.
It's not worse than communism. You can't make that. There's no way to make that.
Yes, it is in the end, because communism, by its internal contradiction, is forced to converge back into monarchy.
Well, a huge fucking cost, right? I mean, look at what the. I mean,
but it's better to pay that cost immediately instead of having to go centuries.
Well, moral or immoral by judging by what standards? If we're judging by the amount of human lives cost, then yeah, I agree with Curt. I mean, just look at how much human lives and suffering has communism costed.
I don't care about that. I care about whether my people are in better evolutionary position.
Your people are in better evolutionary position, taking the liberal path to the exhaustion of that.
Their fertility rate has gone down.
We are exhausting right now the liberal. That's universal. People's opinion of democracy now is in the toilet. We're generating that demand, but in the process of generating the demand for what you're in the end seeking, we have in fact raised vast portions of humanity out of conditions of suffering. But that's
not an ambition that Martin shares.
Why is raising humanity at the cost of our own?
We're not talking about personal care. We're talking about political strategy for populations.
Well, you're justifying your own care as objective.
No, I'm justifying people suffering as objective.
Your own people not surviving is what's the height of immorality.
Right, but nobody's not surviving.
If they're not breeding, they're not surviving.
Right, but no, that isn't true. Right now, we have in America what I estimate is around 100 million extra people necessary for the world, the technological and economic world we're entering. We have too many people. Having the continued growth along the growth curve that everybody was afraid of for decades, I thought was nonsense, which is the overpopulation and underproduction. We've proven that's nonsense, right? The actual problem is that we don't need that many people at all. We don't need the growth. What we need is sustainable populations, and it's to increase in consumption, or in other words, opportunity for the people that exist. But no, we're not facing. We're facing.
Some incentivize replacing those people while their population is going down.
That's part of what you're saying is that we have not only we have insufficiently suppressed the left on one hand, and you're advocating that we should have done the left's murderous collapse of one another instead. That's crazy. That's crazy. There's no way there's no measurement by which you can be right.
That capitalism incentivizes the same thing, bringing in cheap labor.
No, but that's just a failure. It doesn't. That's an incentive. You don't have to seize it. And that's the difference
that's a flaw in capitalism. They're saying you shouldn't be doing capitalism.
All capitalism is a bias for the use of rule of law to be able to distribute the innovation so that more people are engaged in it by incentives. That's all it means, is manage incentives. What the natural incentives. The opposite of capitalism is anything that requires directed incentives, meaning threats. So capitalism is bait and authoritarianism is a threat. That's the only difference between them. People clearly like living under capitalism. What they don't like is living under capitalism that outpaces their rate of adaptation, because the government has thrown them to the fucking mercy of the market without providing an incremental means of adapting to it. So you can't just go back with some Ludditism fantasy and think that you're going to get that the people are going to be happier. People absolutely positive right now in this world.
I'm not looking for happiness.
People in this world are clearly wanting to preserve the system that's been created. They want more voice in it. That's what's happening. And every country in the world is demonstrating it. They're not trying to reverse it. They want it. They just want to have more voice in it. The US is saying, fucking great. Now, if you want more voice, you fucking pay for it because we can't. Right? That's the, I can't think, it's the same thing as when England gave up her empire. They said England was the most moral country ever. It doesn't mean it was it doesn't mean it was perfectly moral. It was just the most moral ever. The United States is following in that tradition. You don't maintain an empire, right, when the people are capable of and want to their individual expressions, as long as they're not a threat to the system that's made those expressions possible. So the world is, I mean, it's not like the Chinese are running around and saying, I want to destroy markets. They just want to preserve the Chinese Communist Party for internal reasons, and that's it. But I don't. So anyway, I think we beat this subject to a pulp now. But there's nobody out there. You have your fantasy, right? Your ideas, your wants. I have my biases because of my position as an Anglo, but my objective is the betterment of mankind on the terms that they see betterment, as long as they don't hurt others in doing it. That's simple. I don't know if there's any more moral ambition than that. And I can, I mean, it doesn't, taking my position out of context, which people generally do, I don't have anything other than what is the best for all, given the circumstances of trade-offs we need to have it. So I don't find your argument insulting. I think that you're expressing a personal desire as a systemic good, and I think you're just wrong. I mean, that's all I'm saying. I don't disagree with your criticisms of the model. I say that all models could consist, in other words, all capitalism versus, or liberalism versus social democracy versus whatever else we want, socialism versus communism versus despotism. The only thing about those models is what are the trade-offs that produce the end results that are different. That's all.
Well, it all converges on monarchy or oligarchy, and oligarchy ends up exploiting people.
Right, and all I'm saying is we shouldn't have gotten rid of the monarchy, because we got rid of the judge of last resort. There's the difference. In America, we have states that have their, within the limits of human rights, or which we call the rights and obligations, they have their freedom to do what the hell they want, as long as it doesn't externalize. And in Europe, so what happened is our country, America, is not a government; it's a market for the production of commons. Whereas in Europe, the countries are smaller, and they are governments, not just markets for the production of commons. And so Europe collectively, without the federal infrastructure, does essentially form a federation. It's just an informal one. And France, of course, wants a formal one so they can dominate it, where Germany wants an informal one so they can influence it. And those are two different things. In America, we have a federal government that has tried to become a governing government rather than a market for the production of commons. And unfortunately, that's coming to an end, just as Europe's attempt to duplicate it is coming to an end, because we're following natural human incentives. My argument would be that the way we do that incrementally and deliberately without killing each other in large numbers is better than the alternatives. Anyway. All right, let's go to the next one, because I think we've beat this one.
I just want to add my closing comment, which is that, as always, and in all of these conversations that I have been witness to, there's also the natural problem of identifying at the at a high level of resolution what we even mean by America, because we use it to denote the country, which is made up of competing factions with differing interests and so on, and actually other interests corrupting what America is able to do, and so on. So I think there's still this preternatural and eternal problem of we don't get to accomplish the aims that we set ourselves in a vacuum. We get to do what we can with the resources we have towards the ends that we want to put them towards, and then we fail at that all the time, and others win also. And so I don't see this necessarily as America having the most moral aims or not, but as the emerging pattern aiming at a certain direction and failing to reach that naturally, and other dynamics contributing more causal, making a greater causal contribution to the end dynamics than those ambitions might have warranted. So anyway,
Okay, I mean, I think the argument you're making, the piece I would pull out of there is that
my argument is that the flaw was in those ambitions.
Wait, say
All right.
again. There what?
That
Flaw
the
was in
flaw
the-
was in those ambitions.
You mean the ambition itself it carries a flaw?
That
It's
it was
fundamentally flawed.
unworkable and that it was inevitable that it would be corrupt.
You could say that for just about any human endeavor.
That's true to some
Every
extent, yeah.
human endeavor has ingrained flaws.
Well, I see the point of this work of natural law to account for all of it.
yes, but we don't get to pick the perfect moral aim that doesn't have flaws. And we also have the benefit of hindsight that they didn't have.
Right.
Well,
And nor do we have the incentives today that they had.
well, for starters, we have to agree on what's moral.
No, we don't
Whose
have to agree.
morality?
We can agree on what's immoral because it's the universal. We can't agree on what's moral because what's moral is whatever satisfies the group, right?
Yeah, again, whose morality is the question.
Yeah.
Well, morality doesn't make sense without a group.
No, hold on. Positive morality, what you want, what you consider moral, is an in-group matter. Negative morality, which is what is immoral. In other words, what will provoke retaliation is universal. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
So
but that's not a matter of morality. It's only immoral insofar you don't want retaliation on your own people.
I mean, I'm just disambiguating the term. Morality is what's good for you. What it produces the limit, the reciprocity distribution within your people that's tolerable, and it allows them to survive. But immorality, in other words, that which will provoke retaliation. You know, there's morality, that which will provoke cooperation, is different from immorality, that which will provoke retaliation. Retaliation is universal. It's our whole system is, I mean, the natural law, our whole system is predicated on all human behaviors. But natural law emerges, was our next question, emerges for a very simple reason, which is people do not agree on the good, but they all agree on what they'll fight you over, which is imposition of costs upon their demonstrated interests. People will fight and kill you for it. So it does. So positive. So I think the problem is using this word morality without understanding it's a constitution from first principles. Morality, cooperation, ethics, cooperation, and immorality, imposition of costs that cause non-cooperation. And ethics, non-cooperation, imposition of costs causes non-cooperation. It's the same fucking thing. No difference in ethics and morality is either you and I are ethically interacting, but we are indirectly morally interacting. So, it's just a matter of external, immorality. In other words, that which provokes conflict is universal among man. It's just the terms differ because of positive morality.
I clearly see morality and cooperation as distinct, and morality even governs who we ought to cooperate with in the first place.
Okay, I want to move on if it's all right, because I don't see the we end up with this.
You every time this stuff comes up, you guys end up in logger jams, and
We're running up a logger jams over the meaning of words, and that's it's just pointless to go there. If either you're arguing first principles, or principles, in other words, either you're, as Aristotle said, you can define your terms, or you can't. If you're arguing over the meaning of words, it means you can't define your terms, or you've got a bias in the definition of your terms because you haven't reduced them to first principles. I just lose my patience with that because it's so futile. It's futile. Either you can define your terms in terms of first principles, in other words, by constructive logic, or you can't. If you can't do that, then you're arguing in favor of bias, and essentially you're engaging in a fallacy of fictionalisms. So I try to not do that. I just want to know what the first principles are. So we're talking about science rather than sentiment. Anyway,
okay.
so
I'm exercising my my authority here, and let's move on because
Yes.
otherwise we're going to be spending all day on this. Question 4 from Suki. I should begin by admitting that I am nearly totally ignorant when it comes to international law, so I hope you can correct any false assumptions or misunderstandings I might have. Given that international law is meant to provide a framework for proper interaction between nation states, and that much of it was written after World War II, my immediate bias is to suspect that parts of it may be somewhat suspect due to the influence from that era's politics. Still, since I know very little about it, I recognize that I can't rely on institution alone and should likely discard my judgment. Since the Natural Law Institute specializes in law, could you first describe what international law is supposed to do, whether you've ever thought about reforming it, and provide some background and history of its development? I'd also like to know where you think its current failings lie, if any, and what might be done to address them, and whether you have any plans or ideas for its reform. Who wants to go first?
I want to stall for a second, so if Martin can go first, I would appreciate it.
Well, I repeat, the only reciprocity in international law is reciprocity of mutually assured destruction. The real international law is law of the jungle, or the rule of the strong. Imperial law is not international law. You can see what we're dealing with in modern history is imperial law, in how much America and Israel are free to ignore it.
An international law is a continuously negotiated strategy for the facilitation of trade. That's its purpose. That's why it's largely a post-war construction. Is that it's designed to prevent the conflict that was generated during the agrarian age and its age of empires, wherein the goal was for an empire to monopolize trade and trade routes so that the maximum rents could be extracted from it. Like most of the post-war era, international law is essentially a set of agreements. It's not a law. It's not really law. It's a set of agreements that are designed to facilitate to negotiate the means by which we do not generate conflict with one another. That's all. The idea is just the same idea as preventing feuds within a country. So most of the law originates with the fact that brothers, fathers, and uncles generally formed policing of the family system, but that imposition generally provoked retaliation, resulting in feuds and what we call unsettled matters. The purpose of the law was to produce settlement. In other words, to stop retaliation cycles. In other words, continuous, persistent harms. The same thing is the purpose of international law, which is to prevent conflicts that provoke retaliations that cyclically expand into wars. So it's just creating a set of rules, negotiating a set of rules, largely for the transport of people and goods, so that they're free of generating conflict. This became increasingly important as the age of sail developed. There were different kinds of alliances when the Silk Road was the primary means of continental trade, of the old continent. But once the Muslims closed the ports at Istanbul, what's it called, Constantinople, this generated demand for the age of sail. The Europeans, as technocrats, developed sail that made it so much more effective. Not only sail, but navigation, that made it possible to crush economically the utility of the Silk Road, and thus destroyed the rent-seeking hierarchy that had preserved the Middle
People
East.
got to remember that tonnage for tonnage, right? Ferrying goods on the water is orders of magnitude cheaper than transporting that same goods on the road. With the invention of railroad, that cost did drop quite a bit, but it's still, like, railroads are still more expensive, like mile per mile, compared to freight.
Right. It's why Russia has problems. It's fucking 11 time zones. The land, other than the eastern land, or the eastern bit of land, the southwestern part of Russia, the land is of low productive yield. Right? It's the steppe problem. The steppe problem has been the steppe problem for fucking ever, right? It's never going to be different unless we figure out how to, like, create a river from the north, somewhere up in the Arctic, and connect it down to the Persian.
No, I mean, forget that the Arctic Ocean is essentially unnavigable.
Right, exactly. And so you get this problem of there's the huge part of the world island, which is Eurasia, is just a pain in the ass with low productivity. So Russia can't use sail. It has to use railroads. Well, railroads are still more expensive than sail. So they have the combination of more expensive transport over less productive land. So you have this population in the Russian Far East, and you have the population in the Russian Far West, and you have this Canada-like strip of population along the edges, and the rest of it's basically inhospitable. Not only it's resource rich, but it's agrarian. In agrarian terms, it's inhospitable, and in life terms, it's inhospitable. It's fucking freezing over there. So another thing is our map. When you look at the world map, it's as if the planet is vertically aligned on poles. It's not. It's at, what is it, 11 or 21 degrees? I don't remember what it is. And so if you take the world and you tilt it like the map, you tilt it like that. That's why this green band is along the middle, right? It's because it's the axis of rotation of the planet. It's actually off. And so you get this hot band that's I've got this in my book somewhere. You get this hot band across the
Tropic of Cancer or Tropic of Capricorn.
You got this hot band right there, but it's actually tilted from the equator, right? The equator is where the sun hits, as the world spins, but the band on our map is actually tilted. It's not straight across. And so that's where all the people in the green are, right? So if you're not there and you don't have access to water, thankfully the way the planet is organized, and partly thanks to Mediterranean, most people down in that area, you know, I mean, have access to rivers and seas. But the minute you get out of that area, it gets to be a pain in the ass. I mean, Africa's real problem is it's fucking enormous, and there's no way to cross it.
I think we're getting a little bit off topic. I just want to add to the point that, so Curt, the analogy you used, which is essentially the argument I think it was Hume made in the Leviathan, is that you have a disinterested third party that mitigates that prevents feud cycles.
That's correct.
But when you apply that to international law, it breaks down at the limits, i.e., there are no supranational body that's truly disinterested. You could say that's the United States, but the United States has its own interests. And that's why a law without law enforcement, in this case, is really just a set of rules of the game. And anybody, and when they choose to, any participant can say, well, I don't want to play by these set of rules. And then it goes back to Martin's point. It really is rule of the jungle.
Right. So this is except that here's the problem. In European history, that the church would basically try to preserve peace, right? Except if you violated those rules, it would say, fuck you, open season. And then the people come, everybody's basically saying, an opportunity, I'm going to go seize it. The same thing happens internationally. You know, if you become a problem, then everybody else says open season on you, right? And so we have way more pressures. We have economic pressures and political pressures and whatever we can throw on people. So it's just become the value in not engaging in conflict is simply too high, right? Look at what happens to the conflict-oriented societies. The people that are playing the game right are the Chinese. They're just saying, I'm going to dominate trade, which makes you dependent upon me, so I have influence. It's fantastic.
Well, my argument would be that Catholic Church was undermining Germany and preventing it from uniting Europe, just like America did later.
I agree with you. It doesn't mean that people are right. It means that at the time when people make decisions, they do the best they can. And this is one of my criticisms of you, Martin, is you have hindsight bias. At the time, people do the best they can, and as long as they're doing the best they can, the negative externalities aren't predictable. So
I'm trying to be more specific because it's just best doesn't compile. Best for whom? What did they think would happen and all that?
They don't think in best. They think in better. I mean, people solve problems. That's what they do. The only reason they act in concert is because they want to either seize an opportunity or solve a problem. So people just solve the problems they can. They're not freaking omniscient, so they experience externalities. And then you have competing interests, which we've talked about in the past, that manifest and expand those externalities until you correct them. Then fortunately, there's a delay between the time where we create an incentive and we correct it. I mean, that's the basic argument about the problem of the way we do law, which is the incremental common law, when we have this issue of a legislature that's ideologically divided. You're better off with a small state where you can say, and especially a small state with a monarchy that can say, I've had enough of your bullshit. You're all fired. Let's start this over. And by the way, we're going to do it this way. You know, because I mean, this is the whole argument made by what's his name there? Oh God, the Machiavellians, Burnham, is that you can't. All collective decision making frequently fails. That's why you need a judge of last resort, and a judge of last resort is best being a monarchy because they have an intertemporal interest which is the ownership interest, whereas politicians have a renter's interest, meaning a temporal interest.
I don't consider that function sufficient. I advocate for monarch as an actual ruler.
You wouldn't get an argument from me, and the problem is you have the bad emperor problem that China has when you do that. So
Yes, if you have a democracy, then you have a permanent bad emperor in practice.
you have a permanent, if you have a mass demand.
Well, the question
Not
is
sure.
whether harm is acute in short amount of time versus longer. But then again, I think Martin, it's a question. You're making a mistake of in hindsight, right? You have this hindsight bias.
The problem is often with this judgment in hindsight. There's plenty of people in the past who were already saying those things.
You're not wrong.
Okay, next question.
Well, so I have a hard stop at 9. Can we answer the next question in 9 minutes?
I think so.
Okay, so question 5 from Quandale. What is the Institute's opinion of the perennial philosophy?
Do I have to give the whole reading here? Can I say it's a waste of your fucking time?
You might
It's
as well give the
fantasy
full
moral.
reading.
If you want, I can read mine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I haven't studied it deeply enough, but it's useful to study what all or most people converge to. It would, however, be a mistake to only stick to that as some absolute truth, when the point of traditional religion and philosophy isn't universality and truth, but aptness to your group. Differences are not to be ignored but emphasized.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to read Kurt's answer if Kurt, you're not.
Please do.
So Kurt's short answer, perennial philosophy is non-operational metaphysics, and therefore undecidable, therefore irreciprocal if marketed as truth rather than as ritual and aesthetic. Tolerable only as mystic pedagogy once stripped of truth claims and prized for externalities. Religion via negativa is permissible as service provision. Okay. Oath, ritual, festival, mindfulness, if and only if we strip supernaturalism and fictionalism and falsehood and keep only functions that raise agency. In that frame, perennial wisdom may serve as literary pedagogy for low ability intuition, but must be composed to testable statements or treated as art. Must be decomposed to testable statements or treated as art, never as truth, and so instrumentally useful as training wheels, and false if so as knowledge, i.e., it's fantasy literature from which we may draw mythical analogies for young children and the dim. Ouch.
True. I mean, yeah, but everything's like that. You know, in philosophy we have like what you learn from your parents, what you learn through fairy tales and kind of stuff. What you learn as you get older, you learn that you need rules, and after that, you learn that you need to understand outcomes. The problem is that's an epistemic climb, right? Not everybody can get to where they have outcome-based reasoning, right, or limits-based reasoning, because not everybody can afford to accumulate the knowledge to make it. Furthermore, not everybody has the ability to learn that knowledge. So we teach children fairy tales and myths. We teach the young. We teach them religion or whatever. We teach the next group of people philosophy and rules, and we teach the next group of people empiricism, science, and outcomes. And that's just an epistemic curve that's necessary for every generation to go through. Do I necessarily want to criticize? What's the guy who the conservative writer who everybody all the right wing guys bring up that they
Jordan Peterson?
No. God damn! I can't believe it's not coming to me.
You mean de Juvenel or Schmidt?
No, those are too high level. Go down the next one. He writes
On what?
Alive or
sorry, I
dead?
can't.
Like a current or
It's not current. No, it's not.
Are there any conservative philosophers still living?
Yeah, great fucking question. God, why can't I pull it up?
Chat
It's
Evola?
Julius
it's
Evola?
Evola. Thank you. It's Evola, right? So Evola, is there? That's like fantasy moral literature for teenagers, right? Is it necessarily bad? It gets you on the path. It's sort of like Rand. What is Rand? Rand is fantasy moral literature for guys in their late teens or 20s, right? I mean, it's
But it
okay.
deceived them. That's the difference.
What?
That it deceived them.
Say that again. I didn't get it.
It's Rand. Martin say Rand deceives them.
It's just another Abrahamic ideology, false promise.
Of course it is. So the problem is what you need, what you can use. Does that make sense? In other words, you need a framework. If you have thoughts bigger than I need to eat shit and fuck. I was supposed to get a smile out of you, Francis. I said that just to get a reaction out of you, and
You did.
Nothing.
No, I did. I chuckled.
So it was that my friend, my other friend Brad said, you need fire, beer, meat, and sex, and men are okay, right? So the problem is that you can't give people empirical, scientific, whatever, if they don't have the requisite knowledge. You can't give them philosophy if they don't have the requisite knowledge or understanding or ability. You give people analogies when they have enough world experience to understand other humans. Before that, you have to use fairy tales because that's what's accessible to the child's mind. Before that, you have to give parental imitation because that's all that's accessible to them. So, I mean, you need to have this spectrum of wisdom literature, so to speak, in order to address the maturation curve and the capacity curve of human beings. That's all great. Now, the problem is when you get stuck. It's like, in my age group, there's like people that are stuck in the 1980s. They still have the fucking hairdo and whatever, right? I mean, we see this all the time, right? Right? They used to. I had a friend who's incredibly handsome, took great care of himself, but he was stuck in 1972, right? I mean, and it was like the fucking hippie. He was still a hippie.
It's the guy that never made the transition to adulthood, or not adulthood, but never made the transition to established male.
Correct. And so was fairly happy, I gotta admit. He ate really super healthy. He dressed in fucking tie-dye shit, right? All the time. He would have walked around in flowing robes. It was the best. He invented shit for bicycles, right? I mean, and he made enough money in software that he could afford to be eccentric, right? I have great stories about. I loved him. I thought he was a walking anachronistic expression of my inner soul. And so anyway, so he was a beautiful person. I mean, he was. Hold on a second, I shut this off. So I gotta call him. Excuse me. Oh fuck! Now I lost you guys. So you run into people like that. They get stuck. Okay. The point is not to get stuck. If you're going to go through what we would call esoterica, like who's the guy we just mentioned again? Evola, right? It's great. It's part of your maturation process. Revel in it, but don't get stuck in it. What I tend to see is guys in philosophy, they find the first person that they can understand and relate to, and they go deep on that person instead of what Martin just recommended, which is you go wide, right? All right, you say, okay, like one of the things that I got in educated by Xaverian monks who are like Jesuit warriors for Catholic conquest of the world, right? So I got we had comparative religion. It was fucking awesome, right? It was one of the most valuable courses I had. We had marriage and family, how to be married and have family. It was one of the most valuable things I had, right? But we had Shakespeare, which was one of the most valuable things you want to look at lots of stuff. And so instead of drilling down on one, try to say, okay, there are frames, and then what you will do is graduate from one to the other.
Mm-hmm.
I get these guys who are hung up on Kant because their nerd capacity is just about that, right? You get guys that are hung up on Heidegger, and they're like, well, that's fucking, Heidegger's just trying to invert subjectivity and objectivity, right? I mean, you have all these stupid games going on, especially among Germans.
The way I kind of look at this, rather than treating these as a tunnel that will lead you, or a path that will lead you to the truth, treat them as rungs of the ladder.
They're rungs of the ladder, correct.
Yeah.
What you'd like to be able to do is, and what I think we encourage, is you get to natural law. That's the science. That's not the philosophy, right? If you can get to natural law, that's great. The problem is, it's not easy.
I think there's, though, a difference between natural law and applied natural law, which looks more like rule.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is what everybody's asking for. They're not asking for the science, they're asking for rule. And this is important that we recognize the difference.
Right. So the problem is the natural law is a negative. It's a limits-based reasoning. Whereas what people want is the positivity. Yeah, fuck, but what can I do to make my life better? And so I would say the reason you want people to go to natural law is you have the foundation of the negativa from which you can express whatever positivity you want within the limits of the negativa. And that's what I view our job as. This is the minimum criteria for which you to understand the cause and consequences of your actions. Beyond that, anything that is permissible within that is merely a choice that you can make. But what we don't want people to do, and what I don't want people to, I don't want people to, is to think the impossible is possible. I don't want people to think communism is possible.
I agree with that part. I don't think natural law, at least as presented by us or by anyone else, encompasses entirety of social science or is in any way finished.
It is the best that we're able to do now.
Yeah. And,
go ahead.
I consider a real option that what people may get from these old philosophers that are now suppressed may be something that we have missed.
Absolutely. I would argue that it's very, given that the ternary logic, right? It's very unlikely that people will contradict what we have produced. What I believe they will do is expand on it, given whatever new opportunities that come in the future. I absolutely believe that. If people get dumber, which is happening because of the asymmetric production due to industrialization, if people continue to get dumber, then the market conditions of cooperation that we've put in the natural law will have to be regulated by authorities that compensate for the incompetence of the populations. I mean, we see this already in the most of the world's IQ is actually 85. It means half of people are too stupid to do anything useful. So that's huge, right? We are in a privilege in the West, and certainly in the Far East, or at least certainly in the Far East, is that we have demographic distributions above what we call IQ 100, and that means that that a large percentage of our populations are capable of cooperative market behaviors. If that's not the case, then what happens is generation of individualism, which is what the markets do, has to be compensated for by a generation of organization or authoritarianism. My argument is that societies make the mistake of trying to do one thing for everybody instead of having communism for the incompetent, socialism for the working class, and markets to civilization for those who are otherwise capable of it. And I think it's unfair that we, especially in America, we throw people with sub 100 IQs into the market without providing them support. I thought unions, had they not tried to extract rents or contain political favors, had done a fairly good job of creating markets, creating frameworks within which people not necessarily capable of market competition could function. So again, we see the privatization that occurred from unions doing the same thing. We see the privatization happening in the economy, in the academy, the same thing that happens in the bureaucracy, the same thing that happens in corporations. The whole problem is constraining people to not privatize the organizations that are being constructed so they can benefit along with everyone else.
Okay. I'm late for my next meeting. I have to cut this short. But question 6 is also from Quande. It was very related to 5. Now, what does the Institute think of Rudolf Steiner and Eddie Bilimoria? So, Curt, you gave you wrote a very thorough reply. I think rather than answering this question or reading it aloud, I'm just going to add the link to your reply to the doc to the YouTube description.
Right. It's too detailed. Yeah.
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 Okay. So let us end it here.
All right. I love you guys. Thank you very much, Martin. I really had enjoyed our conversation. It was really thorough, and sorry if it sounded conflict, but I think this is valuable. And just the fact that we can have that conversation in this forum can educate people. So I view it as valuable. Thank you for your always for your contributions.
I appreciate organizations that would have gotten rid of me time ago.
All right.
Okay.
Maurice, thank you. Francis, for your leadership always. You guys have a great day. Check the comments for anything you need. The audience needs anything else. This is Francis, Martin, Maurice, and Curt for the Natural Institute. This is Friday, January 9th, 2026. Have a great day.